Okay, we are recording. Good morning, Jen. How are you?
Oh, I'm so good. It's actually good evening here.
Yes. Can you tell us where you are right now?
Yeah, I am in Fulham, which is in a little borough in southwest London. It's actually 5 o'clock here, so.
That's so funny. And I am here. So I'm Julie, if anyone's listening in that hasn't listened in before. And this is the Learning to Become podcast slash video cast. We're all over the place. I'm in a coffee shop today. So if you hear some really fun things going on behind me, it's just because I'm out among the people today of Portland. So that's exciting. We just moved here, goodness, not even like 10 days ago. And it has been stellar being here. So it's like morning for us. And so I'm really thankful that you made the time to get to share today. So thank
Oh, of
you.
course. It's so good to see your
It's
face.
so good. We were talking today right before we started recording. So I think we should tell everybody we haven't actually seen each other in like 7 years or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. Since, probably 2009, 2010.
That's ridiculous. And we met, let's see, you worked in the office next to me when I worked at the Dream Center in Los Angeles.
2007?
2007, 2008. Yep, we met there. And then we worked together from then till 2009. And I
Exactly.
remember a great story in that you came over. We had named a turtle in our office after you. And do not call the Humane Society. It was a little bitty turtle, and we very
Yes.
carefully used to take little cars, and we'd put the turtle in the car and have
Oh gosh.
races. I don't know if you remember this.
No.
We have this on a recording, and one of my boss, Justin, just messaged me like a couple days ago, I think, and said, I remember when we used to send the turtle Jennifer, like just shooting along the way, and we'd see how far we could send Jennifer the
Oh,
turtle. Again, no turtles were harmed in
of
the
course.
making of those videos or in the playing around. But I just remember
Oh,
that we named our turtle after you. So it's
that's
great to
so
see you.
sweet. It is so good to see you.
So good to see you. Well, I know that on this episode, if you will, of Learning to Become, we're going to talk about the importance of learning and just what it means to really be able to feel like you can really learn. Because that whole learning to become thing is about being versus doing. So like if you feel
Exactly.
like you're supposed to do something, there can be a lot of stress. But if you become something, like if I am trying to do patience, that's really, really tough. But if I am patience in that I've gone down deep in the learning of it, I've prayed it through, I've asked the Lord for patience, like it just starts to flow out of you naturally. I mean, that's the fruit of the Spirit. That's the fruit in
Exactly.
that you've gone down deep with your roots and now the fruit is coming out. And so in that way, I want to talk to you about learning, what it means to learn. I know that you are right now like a professional learner. You've been that for a really long time.
I am. I've been in school for 8+ years.
That's amazing. That's
It's
amazing.
something.
And remind me what it is that you're actually studying because it's crazy. Like I read it like 4 times and still was like, wow, I'm going to have to look up each of those words.
I'm still wondering too what each of those words mean. Don't worry about it. Yeah, I am into my second year of my PhD. I am essentially looking at the idea of the Jew in the evangelical imagination during the 18th, early 19th century here in England and a bit in Wales. And I'm focusing particularly on evangelical eschatology, philo-Semitism, and early Christian Zionism. So another way to word it would be to say why were evangelicals completely obsessed with Jews, and
Mm.
how do we understand their sustained, um, interest in them to this day?
Wow, that's amazing. That you probably get even more furrowed eyebrows than I get when I say that my master's was in information knowledge strategy, and people are like, "What's that?" See, for me,
Yeah,
I can just be like, "People, processes, and technology," and they're like,
Oh,
Oh, probably
yeah,
something with computers, like they always do.
yeah, 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 yeah.
That's so funny.
Oh, yeah, no, people's eyes just generally glaze over and they're like, oh, okay, that must be interesting.
And you're like, it's my life's work. Thanks.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
That's so great. Well, I love that because as we were again sharing, and I should have pushed record because I feel like there was such great stuff, but maybe we can like pull it back together here.
Of
We were
course.
talking about that learning is typically what we would consider an evolution. And you
Exactly.
and I were both raised in Oklahoma, which was another woot woot of how we connected. We just felt like we understood each other
Exactly.
right away. And in that world, you and I both grew up very in a conservative Christian home, Christian environment, Christian schools, all that. And so for us, like evolution was actually like a very dirty word. It was
Certainly.
something, it was not even just the idea of like the evolution happens today was
Right.
very negative and very considered like, yeah.
Very, almost an evil word, not even a dirty word, but, that was Satan's work in the world.
Yeah, and so in this case, it's like I remember somebody recently pushing me within like the last year or two to push to
Right.
say, could it be that though we are Christians and we believe in a great designer who created the
Of
world,
course.
that we are continuing to evolve? And
Certainly.
as I consider that, was like, well, yeah, like I evolve as
Mhm.
a person. When I go
Right.
out and I see that a fire has occurred or water has occurred, like things
Mhm.
within the world continue to evolve
Of
because of
course.
general use or understanding or whatever. So how have you, and especially in the higher education world, seen your evolution come about, and how do you feel that it's impacted your learning capabilities?
Oh, goodness. That is a big question. And that's a good question. How have I evolved? Oh, well, I would say I can look at, recent troubles and turmoils, and I can look at how I have evolved, even within the last couple months. Um, Doctoral studies are, by definition, very independent. You're working on your own. You have to be able to work by yourself to succeed. And there's value in that. And I would say growing up, I was always a very independent child. I think my first sentence was, Jenny, do it. And, no one help me. I'm going to do it on my own. But, is it funny? I don't know. I recently just kind of run into some troubles with my thesis. It was all going along so well. And I just kind of hit a small bump. And then, I didn't say anything to anyone. And the bump grew bigger and bigger and bigger. And instead of turning to my advisor, who is there to help me, who's essentially my teammate, I turned him into, in my head, judge, jury, and executioner. So I just completely pushed him away, didn't mention it, and was completely overwhelmed. And it was so funny. He finally reached out to me last week, just saying, hey, I haven't heard from you in a while. What's going on? Mm-hmm. And I just kind of filled him in on what was going on. And it was, I heard back from him the next day. And he was an absolute gem. He was understanding and supportive. And for me, I think this right there has taught me to learn to ask for help. I have done everything on my own for so long, but there are people out there who can help. And and it's so hard to ask for help when you are so independent and your research is who you are to some degree. To say it's not working, so help us out there. And what was funny, I don't want to spiritualize it too much, but I was kind of thinking about it, and it's, when I got the email back from him, and it was honestly just nothing but grace. And, there was a part of me that just, that small part that was God saying, okay, how many times do you do this to me? You know, it was you try to do things on your own time and time and time again, and you never ask for my help. But if you ask for my help, I am here. You know, this is what I'm here for, essentially.
That's
And, you know, so it was a learning process. The whole thing is a learning process.
It sure is. Well, and it makes me think that even those who aren't really necessarily going for a higher education degree or something like that, that they're constantly learning, and there does come this almost like a plateau that you hit where you're like, I can't take in any more information. I remember even during that entire year and a half that I was with Columbia, I couldn't write in my journal. I've always been a very avid journaler, and I couldn't do that. And like with like my Bible, I've always been like an exegesis type person. So like I'll get in there and I'll take it word by word, line by line, and I just want to know everything about the scripture. And in that case, I stuck to the Psalms, I stuck to the things I knew, and I would read that and not want to learn, or I couldn't even begin to take in any sort of information that would be something new, because I was on information overload. And so for me, I began to have to not feel guilty about that, because I thought, oh my word, like I was doing Columbia, I was marrying my best friend, I was like doing all this stuff, and I felt like, oh my word, my relationship with God is going on the back burner, when really I had to recognize, like, there are times when you can't necessarily learn anymore, but you do recognize his goodness and his grace. He was giving me the strength to be a light, to be an encouragement to my classmates. He was allowing me and being my teacher in the academic world. He was teaching me how to be a soon-to-be wife at the time. He was teaching me how to love someone well. So for that, like, he didn't necessarily, it couldn't be that cookie cutter look that I had always had of, I'm going to sit down and go through 3 chapters of Hebrews today and have an exegesis at the end of it, you know?
Yeah, no, definitely.
I think that for other people is hopefully something that's encouraging to them, that there are seasons, but I do think that there's something crucial about us being able to push forward and say, no matter where I am, I want to be growing and learning, because, I mean, you think about all of it we know about gravity, you know, that if you're not pushing up toward on the hill, you're going backwards some way. In those places where you feel like there have been major learning curves, were there also opportunities for you just to sit in the silence as well and be okay with that, or has that been a struggle for you?
Oh gosh, that has definitely been a struggle. Because you do have deadlines, you do have things that you're constantly pushing for. And sitting there and just being okay with what feels like inactivity is extremely difficult. It is extremely difficult.
Do you think that's from outside pressures, or do you think that's something that's inwardly driven?
No, certainly internal. Certainly. Come on now.
And why do you think that is? I mean, you know, again, women learning specifically is very unique to our culture. It's very unique only within the last couple hundred years that women were even considered worthy to be educated. So why is it? Because we're trying to play catch up with the men? What do you think that is?
Yeah, no, definitely. We kind of touched on this briefly before we started recording. I think a lot of it does have to do with imposter syndrome. You know, if we are not constantly proving ourselves, then we are where we are simply because of luck so I think I do at least. I feel like I constantly need to be producing results. And if I'm not producing results, then something's wrong.
Is that the definition you would say then of imposter syndrome? I've been hearing that more and more. Is that like a buzzword, or is that something more academic?
No. Imposter syndrome, I think I can look it up simply because I want to be exact. It was described it was a term coined in 1978 by clinical psychologists. And essentially, it is the idea that your success or your achievements are not the result of your own effort, but rather they are the result of luck, being in the right place at the right time, or, charming people or fooling people into believing that you are better than what you are.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I can definitely see where that's going to be something in our culture that we constantly are like, no, man, I got this.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm thinking about how Andrew and I went to the beach last week for my birthday and how there were a lot of muscly guys and they would take their shirts off. And my sweet husband, he's gorgeous and doesn't need to go to the gym. And that kind of makes me sick sometimes. Just you're like, oh man, he just looks naturally, ripped and stuff. But then, you see these big dudes that have obviously been to the gym. They're obviously taking supplements. And I remember laughing as they were like taking their shirts off and having people take selfies and just saying to Andrew, let's not mock, not that we would mock them, but I think we said something like, they deserve it. They worked really hard for those. Like, sure, let them take a selfie.
Yeah.
So in the same way, though, I think there is that desire, like you're talking about, that we feel that we need to show the world that, like, whether it's through Facebook or Twitter or something, like at the gym, going hard, so that when someone sees us, they're not going to think we're just naturally skinny. Like, no, I worked for this body. Whether it's our cooking abilities or our friendliness, like, wow, I read this beautiful scripture. And I think there's a balance, because I think there's something about when you learn something, you want to share that because it's good and it's learning and you're like, wow, like that really touched me. Like you're saying, though, I think there is a balance, because then if we feel that we have to prove that we're not an imposter and then we belong where we are, that's where this whole learning thing gets out of whack.
Agreed. No, you've nailed it.
That's good. Woo, boy, I really feel like we've, I laughingly say these learning to become podcast and video casts like really make me feel like I'm on the psychologist couch and that like, wow, that just really helped me right there.
Oh, good.
I had a moment. No, I think that is huge because we're not imposters. The great thing is that every part of us, whether we're learning because we're a stay-at-home mom or because we are working within an office or we're pursuing a PhD or something, like in all of those cases, as long as we're being intentional, we're going to learn something, right?
Definitely. And, you never know when you will learn. So much of it is a process. So much of life, so much of research is just going and going, and then going just a little bit more, then all of a sudden it all starts making sense.
Yeah. And I would encourage those, because for what I've learned is those who are like, I don't have time to sit down and pursue a degree, or I don't have time to do all this stuff. I think really looking intentionally at what life is bringing you and what you can learn from it is a big thing, because I know that I pursued film because I loved people and I loved seeing how they made decisions and how they came out, and like thinking that is how society is impacted because of the way that we see film, people reflected in film. And so like when you think about you're going to the gym and you're having a conversation with somebody, or something bothers you or something excites you, to actually sit in the car on the way home and instead of just mindlessly putting on the radio and just letting yourself go somewhere else, to think, what did I learn from that interaction? What did I learn? What am I thinking about? And then even if you're like, go home and say, I'm going to research that, or I'm going to look that up. Or like when you were telling me about the things that you're studying, I remember right after that going and looking it up because you had messaged it to me on like Facebook or something. And so I was like, I don't even know what each of those words are. I'm going to take like 2 minutes and just look it up. And it ended up, I don't know if I told you this, but you're having a discussion about that, or like sharing that. Andrew and I were going on a 12-hour road trip, like within 2 days of that. And we got into this whole conversation about Zionism and the pros and the cons. And we were just like, for 2 hours, we're riveted. We were looking stuff up on Andrew was driving. So I was looking stuff up for us. We were reading definitions. We were learning different things. And it's like, I took something that was just natural. Like, it wasn't that I started a new collegiate career.
Of course,
But I took what was something
developed.
in life and
Mm-hmm.
we started to say, how would we, if someone said, do you believe in Zionism? We thought,
Right.
let's see what we would say and try
Mhm.
to go back and forth between each other and make our statements and make our case and see how it works out. And you learn so much in the process of that.
Definitely. No, and as you're talking, I'm reminded of this, a quote in a book that I read a long time ago. That was a life marked by depth is only cultivated in protracted periods of silence and solitude and reflection. Concepts foreign to those who live at the speed of light. And
Wow.
yeah.
That's a good one. Put it on a pillow.
Right. No, but it just kind of goes back to your whole thought of, when something does happen, don't go and turn on the radio and block it out immediately. Sit down with it, think about it, figure out what it means, and evolve.
That's so good. And I think as we're wrapping up here,
Oh, yes.
to help people understand what the purpose is of evolving, because
Yes.
some people, again, whether they're saying, well, that is, I don't know, either maybe they fear learning because, if you don't know what you don't know, you can kind of live in this quietness. I remember the
Right.
last 6 months or so, Andrew and I living on a horse farm, and people would ask me different things about the news. Like, we tried to stay up on current events. We traveled to Uganda in that time, so we kind of knew what was going on in the world. But certain things, like they would say, have you heard about this going on? And we would say no, and we would laughingly say, we live on a horse farm. And in saying that, we kind of live away from everything. Mainstream and everything that's going on because we're so isolated.
Right.
How would you react to someone who said, I'm scared of learning, I'm scared of evolving because I don't know where it will land me, especially in my faith? Because you mentioned that component. That's a big one. If they're scared of losing their faith, some people have that fear.
No, definitely. And I would say, you know what? Well, first off, I would say everyone has a different calling on their life. Some people are called to pursue higher education, but I do think we are all called to develop our minds and
Scripture, I'll say scripture backs that up as well.
Definitely.
Yeah.
No, we all have been given time and talents and different abilities, which we are going to be held accountable for. And our mind is one of our greatest talents that we have. To say that you are afraid of losing your faith, you know what? I would say that totally makes sense. You have seen people have gotten swept up in higher education with different philosophies and whatnot. But you know what? God doesn't call us to be afraid. Plug into scripture, plug into what he wants, chase after God, guard yourself, guard your heart, guard your mind, and go for it.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I think being grounded in scripture, I just heard this weekend, our pastor was talking about not being misguided by false prophets. And he was talking about that there are so many that may come up with these ideas, these creative ideas of philosophy or theology or something, but if it's not based in scripture, to recognize it as false. And so, we can explore science because God made science. Andrew and I have been on a kick for like the last 3 months about how and kick meaning that we study it. We think about, we dialogue it over the dinner table. About the natural and the supernatural not being separate. And so when you look at it, like God is here and he's with us and he's created these things and he actually expresses himself in these beautiful ways. And we've been really getting into how God shows himself in the feminine way, especially in nature, when you see the beauty and you see the softness of a plant, or you see the delicateness of the way the grass blows and how God does that. Now, at one point in time, that would have scared me. Just to explore the feminine side of God would have frightened me. But when grounded in scripture, I know that like God is part of the natural and the supernatural. Right. And so going off of that, and that that there is this being, that God is in every single thing, then I can explore it, because again, grounded in nature, grounded in accountability, like you're talking about, I've got accountability there. It's a beautiful thing. And I think it opens us up all the more to the different levels of even our understanding who God is. Like you can go, this is love. I love love. And then you're like, wow, God is love. Oh my gosh. Oh my word. And then you get to another one, like love is amazing and God is that, you know?
Right. And I would say, that's a very historical perspective of looking at nature. I mean, originally there was the book of nature and the book of God, and that was how early modern Christians understood God. They would go outside, they would look at the world, they would explore the world, they would experience God and all of his creations. And then they would go to church, and then they would get the scripture, and that would supplement their understanding of who God is. I mean, that is right on.
That's perfect. And I think from that perspective, then going back to when someone's coming home from the gym and they're analyzing their day and they recognize different parts and celebrating and being grateful and recognizing, just being intentional with the intentional mind of, I'm going to be grateful for 3 things today, and then going deeper and not just saying, I'm grateful for my kids. Well, why are you grateful? Because of this, or I'm grateful for that friendship. Well, why? Because they're showing, or they're showcasing the love of God in this way. They showed me patience. They showed me grace. What you were talking about with your professor or your advisor, like they showcase like what God's grace is on a smaller level, and because you had an intentional mind, you recognized it as such. So that's learning all the time. I love it.
It is.
I love it. Well, it was wonderful to talk to you today.
Oh, it was so good to talk to you.
It feels so good to talk to you from over the seas. Oh, I love that we can do this. So how much longer until your PhD is done?
Oh, goodness. Granted, I don't take another four months off from my PhD again. Hopefully, I should be done in the next 2 to 3 years.
Okay.
But I definitely think there will be several more speed bumps along the way. But you welcome them, you ride them out.
You sure do.
Yeah,
you
don't start a commune.
Hey, I think that could be fun too. It makes me the final thought I'll have on that, because that stimulates another thought. That there was a gal that I once counseled, and she was actually trying to get rid of her tobacco addiction, and she asked me just point blank, "Can you help me do this?" And I'm thinking, I have no idea how to do that. But she was so confident that I could be the one to help her that I just quickly prayed and asked the Lord, like, please help me to know how to help this girl. And like all of a sudden, like, oh, sure, that would be great. Like comes out of my mouth. I'm thinking, Lord, you better have a good idea, because I still have nothing. And as I was sharing, she and I started getting into this conversation about what it would be like, and this is years before I went to Africa, but we talked about how when you go to Africa and you're going on a safari, that you're on a bus or something, and you're going to hit bumps along the way, but you don't turn around and like go back because you hit a bump. There's going to be a bump, and so either you're bump free or you hit a bump. And so I think she was like chewing tobacco like 4 times a day or something. So we got an understanding of her calendar as to what time of day she would typically do it, because of high stress or because it was first thing in the morning or whatever. And so I would text her every single day for a year at those times. Like my Google Calendar would just remind me, and I would send her a note and say bump or free. And she would say bump if she'd had one, and she was not. And so I just think even understanding that, I love you going, there's going to be another bump along the way, but recognizing there's going to be a bump, because it's upward learning, and you're going to fall and you're going to go, but wow, I'm so proud of you for working so hard. And I want to keep hearing more and more of your research. So if you need someone to bounce ideas off of.
Oh, certainly. And I want to hear what you and your hubby talked about in more depth.
Yes. For another podcast or another day or another conversation for sure, because that one we could go on and on, because we have lots of good questions for you.
Oh, good. I'd love that.
I love you, Jen.
I love you too.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today.
Oh, of course. And you have a lovely day.
Thank you. Yes, have some tea for me.
Oh, I will. I will.
Thanks, love.
All right, bye.